Commander Laraka stood at the viewport of the Cthar warship Vindicator, her posture rigid and perfect as she observed the approaching shuttle. The reflection of her face in the transparent alloy revealed nothing of her thoughts. High cheekbones, silver-flecked skin, and eyes that gleamed with the characteristic amber luminescence of her species. Her ceremonial armor, burnished to a mirror sheen and etched with the ancient glyphs of her bloodline, remained motionless as she breathed. "The human arrives," announced Subcommander Kalen, her second-in-command. His voice carried the familiar precision she had come to expect after 5 cycles of service together. "So, it would seem," Laraka replied, her mandibles clicking slightly in what her crew recognized as disapproval. Another diplomatic necessity in this alliance. The word felt strange in her mouth. The alliance between the Cthar Dominion and Earth's United Defense Force was barely 2 standard years old, cobbled together out of mutual threat rather than mutual respect. The mysterious attacks along the Orion Arm had forced their species into cooperation, but that didn't mean Laraka had to embrace it enthusiastically. She turned from the viewport, her movements economical and deliberate. The bridge crew of the Vindicator maintained their stations with the perfect efficiency expected of the elite Zephyr Squadron. Not a sound beyond the necessary communications, not a motion wasted. This was the Cthar way: structure, discipline, technological superiority. She had risen to command through 15 years of flawless service, each promotion earned through perfect adherence to the battle doctrines established over centuries. "His record?" she asked, extending her hand without looking as Kalen placed a data crystal in her palm. "Lieutenant Jake Riley. Call sign Maverick. 5 years of service with the UDF. Decorated twice for unorthodox tactics during the Proxima Centauri campaign." "Unorthodox," Laraka repeated, the word clearly distasteful. "I imagine that's a euphemism." The airlock hissed open at the far end of the bridge. The human who entered was not what Laraka had expected, though she wasn't entirely sure what she had expected. Lieutenant Riley was of average height for his species, wearing a flight suit that appeared worn rather than deteriorated, clearly maintained but not to Cthar standards. Small customizations violated uniform protocols. A patch on his shoulder bearing some kind of earth bird of prey, scuffed boots that had seen genuine planetary action, and a relaxed posture that betrayed a complete lack of formal military bearing. "Commander," he said with a casual salute and a smile that displayed far too many teeth. "Lieutenant Jake Riley, reporting for liaison duty." "Call me Maverick, everyone does." Laraka did not return the smile. "I will call you Lieutenant Riley, as that is your rank and designation. I am Commander Laraka of the House of Sarek, Zephyr Squadron, 7th Fleet of the Cthar Dominion. You will address me as Commander." If the human was offended, he didn't show it. Instead, his smile widened. "Yes, Commander. Looking forward to learning from the best." The Cthar reputation for precision is legendary, as is the human reputation for improvisation. She returned coolly. "Allow me to be direct, Lieutenant. Your presence aboard the Vindicator is a diplomatic requirement, not a tactical necessity. You will observe, you will learn, and you will interfere minimally with standard operations. Is that understood?" "Crystal clear, Commander," Riley replied, glancing around the bridge with undisguised interest. "Though I was told I'd be participating in combat exercises as well. Cultural exchange and all that." Several of the bridge crew exchanged glances. Kalen's posture stiffened even further. "You will participate," Laraka affirmed, "as a demonstration of UDF capabilities. I've scheduled a simulation for 0600 tomorrow. I suggest you familiarize yourself with our protocols before then." Riley nodded, seemingly unbothered by her dismissive tone. "I'll do my homework, Commander. But fair warning, I'm more of a hands-on learner." The combat simulation the following morning provided Laraka with exactly the confirmation she had been expecting. The human pilot was undisciplined, erratic, and entirely too dependent on what he called instinct and what she recognized as simple luck. The Cthar pilots of Zephyr Squadron moved with choreographed precision, their formation attacks devastating the simulated enemy craft with overwhelming firepower. Each maneuver was executed with mathematical precision, each attack vector optimized for maximum effect with minimum exposure. Lieutenant Riley, by contrast, flew like a wild animal, banking and rolling at seemingly random intervals, breaking formation, using terrain features in ways that violated standard approach procedures. When the simulation ended, his survival was clearly a matter of fortune rather than skill. Your performance was noteworthy, Lieutenant, LaRocca commented in the debriefing room, her voice clinical. Though I notice you abandoned the attack pattern 16 seconds into the engagement. The pattern made us predictable, Riley replied, leaning back in his chair with that infuriating casual posture. The enemy targeting systems were starting to anticipate our movements. I created some chaos. Chaos is not a tactical advantage, Lieutenant. Precision and overwhelming force are what win engagements. With respect, Commander, sometimes chaos is exactly what you need. The enemy can't predict what you're going to do if you don't know yourself. Several of the Cathar pilots chittered in what humans might interpret as laughter, but was actually derision. Kalen spoke, his voice carrying the formal tone of official rebuke. The UDF's reliance on soft skills and intuitive response is precisely why your casualty rates are 34% higher than ours in comparable engagements. Our battle doctrines are the product of centuries of refinement. And they work great, Riley acknowledged, against enemies that fight conventionally. But what about the ones that don't? What about the attacks we've been seeing along the Orion Arm? No known signatures, no pattern recognition. LaRocca's eyes narrowed slightly. We adapt our doctrines as necessary, Lieutenant, but we do so through analysis and tactical evolution, not. She gestured at him dismissively, gut feelings and luck. Fortune favors the prepared mind, Commander, Riley said with a small shrug. But sometimes you've got to improvise when preparation meets reality. You achieved your mission objective, LaRocca acknowledged coldly, but your methods exposed both yourself and your wingmates to unnecessary risk. In a real engagement, such deviations could prove fatal. Riley seemed about to argue further, but something in her posture must have warned him against it. Instead, he simply nodded. Understood, Commander. You will observe the next 3 training rotations from the auxiliary control room, LaRocca instructed. Perhaps observation will provide the structure your approach clearly lacks. As the human left the briefing room, Kalen approached her station. The Alliance Command will expect a thorough evaluation, and they will receive one, LaRocca replied. Accurate in every detail. 2 standard weeks passed with the human lieutenant largely relegated to observation duties. LaRocca had almost managed to forget his presence on her ship when the distress call arrived. Commander, Kalen's voice cut through her meditation cycle in her private quarters. Priority signal from mining colony Tau 14. They're reporting a major seismic event and are requesting immediate evacuation assistance. Tau 14 was one of the joint ventures established under the Alliance. A Cathar mining operation with human engineering support on the unstable moon of a gas giant in the Arcturus sector. The gravity fluctuations made it an ideal location for harvesting certain rare heavy elements, but also created unpredictable tectonic activity. Prepare Zephyr Squadron for immediate deployment, she ordered, already moving toward her armor rack. Full rescue protocol, atmospheric insertion vessels, medical support. We depart in 20 minutes. The briefing was concise and exact. Tau 14's main facility had suffered structural damage from a major quake. Auxiliary power was failing. 26 personnel were confirmed alive but trapped, with another 14 unaccounted for. Atmospheric conditions were deteriorating as the moon's unstable crust vented toxic gases. Our approach will follow standard Cathar Rescue Protocol Delta 7. LaRocca explained as the holographic display showed their planned insertion vectors. 2 teams will secure the primary habitat structures, while a third will establish a secure evacuation corridor. Extraction must be complete within 4 hours before the next gravitational peak increases seismic activity beyond safe operational parameters. Lieutenant Riley, who had been included in the briefing as a courtesy to Alliance protocols, raised his hand. Commander, I notice your plan doesn't account for the methane geysers on the western approach. Laraka's gaze snapped to him. The geological survey data shows no such features in our operational zone. The survey data is 3 months old, Riley countered, bringing up his personal data pad. I've been monitoring the UDF communication channels. The engineering team reported new vent formations 2 weeks ago. Their last transmission mentioned increasing frequency. A flicker of annoyance crossed Laraka's features. And this information wasn't shared through official channels? Bureaucracy, Riley said with a shrug. It was in their weekly status report, but those get filtered through about 6 different departments before reaching joint command. Kalen leaned forward. If this information is accurate, our primary insertion vector could be compromised. Laraka studied the human's data pad, then looked at her own tactical display. Even if these vents exist, our ship's shields can compensate for minor atmospheric disturbances. These aren't minor, Commander, Riley insisted. I've seen similar formations on Titan. When they blow, they can throw debris up to 2 kilometers and create electromagnetic disturbances that play havoc with navigation systems. The rescue operation began according to Laraka's plan, with only minor adjustments to their approach vectors based on Riley's information. She had incorporated his data. She wasn't foolish enough to ignore potentially critical intelligence, but had maintained the core Cathar rescue protocol. The human would remain aboard the Vindicator in an observation capacity. That plan lasted approximately 17 minutes. Commander, Kalen's voice crackled through the communication system as their dropships entered the moon's upper atmosphere. We're detecting multiple energy spikes consistent with massive methane eruptions on the western approach. Vector 1 is no longer viable. Laraka processed this information with the rapid efficiency expected of a Cathar commander. Squadrons 2 and 3, maintain course. Squadron 1, adjust to approach vector Gamma 9. We will. Her orders were interrupted by a massive atmospheric disturbance that rocked her vessel. Warning indicators flashed across her control panels. Energy spike was significantly larger than predicted, reported her pilot. Navigation systems experiencing interference. Shields holding at 78%. Another blast rocked the ship, more violent than the first. Multiple eruptions, Kalen reported. The seismic activity appears to be increasing at an accelerated rate. The moon's crust is showing signs of cascading failure in sectors adjacent to the colony. Laraka rapidly calculated alternatives. The standard protocols assumed a stable approach vector, which they no longer had. The time window for rescue was shrinking rapidly. Commander, Lieutenant Riley's voice came through unexpectedly on her private channel. Request permission to launch an auxiliary shuttle with modified approach. Denied, Lieutenant. This is a Cathar operation. Commander, I've dealt with this kind of unstable terrain before. The shuttle's smaller profile can use the gas vent's thermal updrafts to advantage. I can reach the colony from the eastern ridge while your main force diverts to the southern approach. That approach takes you directly over an active fault line, she replied sharply. Exactly. The fault line creates a pressure channel that's predictable if you know what to look for. The colonists call it the dragon spine for a reason. It breathes, but on a pattern. Laraka was about to issue another denial when a third, even more violent eruption sent cascading system failures through 2 of her support vessels. The rescue operation was rapidly deteriorating. You have exactly 4 minutes to explain your alternative approach, Lieutenant, she said finally. Riley's plan was unorthodox, risky, and violated at least 7 standard Cathar operational protocols. It involved repurposing mining equipment from the colony's exterior storage, creating improvised pressure vents, and using what he called surfing the shock waves to move between extraction points. It was precisely the kind of improvisation that Laraka considered the hallmark of inferior tactical thinking. It was also, she was forced to admit, potentially their only option as the situation on Tau 14 continued to deteriorate rapidly. You may proceed with the eastern approach, she said finally, but you will maintain constant communication, and at the first sign that your improvisation is endangering the mission, you will abort and returned to standard protocol. "Yes, Commander," Riley replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "And thank you." "Do not thank me for allowing you to risk your life unnecessarily, Lieutenant," she replied coldly. "Execute your plan. Zephyr Squadron will proceed with modified protocol Delta 7 Alpha along the southern approach." The next 3 hours were among the most chaotic of Laraka's career. The moon's instability had increased beyond all projected models, forcing constant adjustments to their extraction plan. 2 of her vessels had suffered significant damage from debris strikes, and communication with the colony was intermittent at best. Riley, meanwhile, had somehow managed to reach the colony's eastern access port. Using repurposed mining equipment and what appeared to be completely improvised technical solutions, he had established an alternative evacuation route for 12 colonists who had been cut off from the main facility. "We've stabilized the pressure in Junction 7, his voice reported through the static, using coolant from the mining rigs to freeze a support structure. "It won't hold forever, but it should give us enough time to get everyone out." The structural integrity of that section was compromised beyond standard safety parameters, Kalen observed, watching the feed from Riley's helmet camera. By all calculations, it should have collapsed already. Laraka didn't respond immediately. Her attention focused on coordinating the main extraction team. But part of her was forced to acknowledge that the humans' unorthodox methods were proving unexpectedly effective in these chaotic conditions. By the time the operation concluded, all 40 personnel had been evacuated from Tau 14. 3 had suffered serious injuries requiring immediate medical attention, but there had been no fatalities, an outcome that, given the rapidly deteriorating conditions, exceeded even Laraka's most optimistic projections. In the post-operation briefing, she acknowledged Riley's contribution with formal correctness but little warmth. "Your initiative provided an effective secondary extraction route, Lieutenant. Though I must note that several of your improvisations violated safety protocols that exist for very good reasons." Riley, looking exhausted but satisfied, simply nodded. "Sometimes you have to work with what you've got, Commander. But I appreciate the acknowledgement." What she didn't tell him, what she was barely willing to acknowledge to herself, was that his approach had demonstrated an adaptability that traditional Cathar tactics lacked. It was a disturbing realization, one that she filed away for further analysis when she wasn't surrounded by her officers. Further analysis would have to wait, however. The data recovered from Tau 14 systems contained something far more troubling than evidence of natural disaster. The seismic activity was artificially induced, Kalen reported 2 days later, his voice tense with controlled anger. The colony's geological stabilizers were systematically sabotaged over a period of several weeks. This was a deliberate attack. Laraka studied the evidence on her display screen. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone had carefully recalibrated the stabilizers to amplify rather than dampen the moon's natural tectonic movement. It was a sophisticated operation that would have required detailed knowledge of both the geological conditions and the specific equipment used at Tau 14. "Analysis suggests the Black Shard faction," Kalen continued. "The sabotage methodology matches 3 previous attacks on joint operations. The Black Shard, a splinter group composed of both Cathar and human extremists opposed to the Alliance. They had conducted increasingly bold strikes against joint facilities, but this was their most ambitious attack yet." "Their objective?" Laraka asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "The facility's research data, most likely. Tau 14 was testing new applications for the gravitonium deposits found in the moon's mantle. Military applications." Laraka nodded slowly. "Alert Alliance Command. Prepare a full intelligence report. And," she hesitated briefly, "request Lieutenant Riley's presence. His unorthodox perspective may be useful in anticipating further unconventional attacks." The human arrived promptly, looking more serious than she had yet seen him. When presented with the evidence of sabotage, his reaction surprised her. "They're still there," he said immediately. Kalen tilted his head. "Explain." "This level of sabotage requires constant adjustment. The moon's geological patterns are too unpredictable for a set-it-and-forget-it approach. Riley pointed to several data points on the display. These modifications were made within hours of the main event. Someone was monitoring and fine-tuning the collapse. You suggest Black Shard operatives remained in the vicinity while we conducted rescue operations? LaRocca asked. Not just in the vicinity, Riley replied. I bet my flight wings they're still on that moon, or somewhere very close. The gravitonium research is valuable, but if they were just after data, they're easier targets. I think they're after something physical, maybe a prototype or samples of processed material. LaRocca considered this. It was speculation, but it aligned with the evidence. The mining facility has a secondary research laboratory in the southern hemisphere. It was reported abandoned when the seismic activity began, but if your theory is correct, it will be the perfect cover, Riley finished. Everyone rushes to evacuate the main facility. Meanwhile, they have free access to the isolated lab while the moon is considered too unstable for immediate return. For the first time since his arrival, LaRocca looked at the human with something approaching respect. A viable theory, Lieutenant. If correct, we have a limited window before they complete whatever objective they're pursuing. We need to go back, Riley said. Simply, not we, Lieutenant. Zephyr Squadron will conduct a tactical insertion to secure the secondary facility. Riley shook his head. With respect, Commander, you need me on this one. The moon's even more unstable now, and your standard approach vectors aren't going to work. Plus, the Black Shard clearly knows Cthar tactical protocols. They had to plan this sabotage. They'll be expecting your typical precision strike. And what do you propose instead? She asked, already suspecting the answer. Something they won't be expecting. Something a little chaotic. 20 hours later, LaRocca found herself doing something she would have considered unthinkable just weeks before, implementing a battle plan partially designed by a human lieutenant with a reputation for recklessness. It was not a comfortable position for a Cthar commander raised on centuries of carefully refined military doctrine. Yet here they were, approaching Tau 14 with their signature drives operating at unusual frequencies to mask their energy signatures, using the moon's increased electromagnetic disturbances as cover rather than attempting to compensate for them. The formation was looser than Cthar standard, another concession to Riley's insistence that predictability was their greatest vulnerability. Secondary facility in visual range, reported her sensor officer. No obvious signs of activity, but the interference is significant. Life signs? LaRocca asked. Inconclusive. The gravitonium deposits are distorting our scans. She nodded. It was as they had anticipated. Proceed with Phase 1. Phase 1 of Riley's plan was, in fact, quite conventional, a standard Cthar approach pattern that would alert any observers to their presence. The deviation came in Phase 2, which was already underway as Lieutenant Riley's shuttle, operating with minimal power signature, approached from the opposite vector, using the moon's natural electromagnetic disruptions as cover. What happens when the Black Shard detects our primary approach? Kalen had asked during planning. They'll assume it's a standard Cthar tactical insertion, Riley had explained. They'll have countermeasures prepared, probably electronic warfare to disrupt your targeting systems, maybe some kind of swarm attack to overwhelm your formation discipline. And how does knowing this help us? Because we'll be ready for it, Riley had said with that infuriating grin. And while they're focused on countering what they expect from you, I'll be coming in from where they don't expect anyone. Now, as Zephyr Squadron maintained their approach toward the secondary facility, LaRocca watched her tactical display with intense focus. Riley's shuttle had disappeared from sensors minutes ago, either destroyed or, more likely, masked by the moon's electromagnetic interference as planned. Energy spike called out her sensor officers suddenly. Multiple small craft launching from the facility's southern hangar. The tactical display updated to show more than a dozen small, agile vessels rising to meet them. A swarm attack, just as Riley had predicted. They're deploying electronic countermeasures, Kalen reported. Our targeting systems are experiencing degradation. LaRocca felt a momentary surge of something uncomfortably close to doubt. The standard Kthar response would be to fall back, regroup, and bring overwhelming firepower to bear once their systems compensated for the interference. But that was exactly what the Blackshard would be expecting. Maintain course, she ordered instead. Switch to manual targeting protocols. Squadrons 2 and 3 execute Pattern Sigma. Pattern Sigma was a rarely used Kthar formation designed for fighting in asteroid fields, looser than standard formations, with greater individual discretion allowed to pilots. It was considered suboptimal in most combat scenarios, trading the overwhelming force of concentrated fire for increased survivability in chaotic environments. The Blackshard attack swarm faltered momentarily, clearly surprised by the Kthar adaptation. It was enough of an opening for Laraka's forces to score several direct hits, destroying 3 enemy craft in the first exchange. "They're adjusting," Kalen warned as the swarm dispersed into a more defensive pattern, attempting to re-establish electronic jamming focus. "Continue to randomize our emission frequencies as planned," Laraka ordered. "Status on Lieutenant Riley?" "Still no contact," Kalen replied. "If he survived the approach, he should be reaching the facility's maintenance access by now." The battle above the facility intensified as the Blackshard forces recovered from their initial surprise. Their smaller craft were individually no match for Kthar vessels, but in sufficient numbers and with the advantage of the moon's electromagnetic interference, they presented a serious threat. Laraka's flagship rocked as enemy fire penetrated their defensive screen, alarms blaring as secondary systems failed. "Direct hit to starboard stabilizers," reported her damage control officer. "Shields at 62% and falling. Communications array damaged." Another impact sent a shower of sparks from a nearby console. Kalen, moving to assist the injured crew member, was caught by the blast, a piece of shrapnel embedding itself in his shoulder. He staggered but remained at his post, green blood seeping through his fingers as he applied pressure to the wound. "Sub-Commander, report to medical," Laraka ordered. "With respect, Commander, I can still function," Kalen replied, his voice tight with pain but steady. Before she could insist, their tactical situation deteriorated further. 3 more enemy craft had appeared from the facility's eastern hangar, larger vessels with heavier armaments. They were anticipating a second wave, Laraka realized. Standard Kthar doctrine calls for reinforcements at precisely this interval. The Kthar playbook, so carefully refined over centuries, had become their weakness. Their enemies had studied them, learned to predict them, and prepared specifically to counter them. It was a humbling realization for a commander raised to believe in the superiority of her species' military doctrine. As if reading her thoughts, Kalen spoke quietly. "Perhaps there is something to be said for the humans' chaos after all." Before she could respond, their communications officer straightened suddenly. "Commander, I'm detecting a transmission on an emergency UDF frequency. It's Lieutenant Riley." "Put it through," Laraka ordered. Riley's voice came through filled with static but understandable. "Inside the facility. Confirmed Blackshard operation. They've extracted approximately 20 kilograms of processed gravitonium and are preparing for departure. I've identified their command vessel in the main hangar." "Your status, Lieutenant?" Laraka asked. "Currently undetected. They're focused on fighting you. I've accessed their internal systems, but I need a distraction to reach the hangar." Laraka made a rapid decision. "Lieutenant, transmit their command vessel's specifications. We'll draw their defense forces away from the facility with a tactical withdrawal, then execute a precision strike on their escape vessel." "Negative, Commander," Riley replied. "Their communications are sophisticated. They'll detect any detailed transmission. And a precision strike won't work. They've got gravitational shielding. That's what they've been developing here." "Then what do you propose?" she asked, already suspecting his answer. "I'm going to plant explosives on their drive core. Old-fashioned, but effective. I just need you to create enough chaos up there to keep their attention off internal sensors for about 10 minutes. Laraka exchanged glances with Kalen. "That's a suicide mission, Lieutenant." "Not if I time it right," Riley replied, though his tone lacked its usual confidence. "I'll set a delayed detonation and use one of their own shuttles to extract. It was reckless, dangerous, and completely outside standard protocol. It was also, Laraka had to admit, possibly their only option for preventing the Black Shard from escaping with enough processed gravitonium to create weapons of mass destruction. "You have your 10 minutes, Lieutenant," she said finally. "Zephyr Squadron will provide your distraction. But be aware, we cannot delay our strike indefinitely. If you're not clear by the time the enemy prepares for departure, we will have no choice but to destroy the facility regardless of your position." "Understood, Commander," Riley replied. "And thank you for the trust." Laraka didn't respond to that. Instead, she turned to her tactical officer. "Prepare all remaining vessels for maximum engagement. We're going to show these Black Shard amateurs what true Cthar warfare looks like." The next 10 minutes were among the most intense combat situations Laraka had ever experienced. With their standard tactical doctrines compromised, she was forced to innovate, to fight with the kind of inspired improvisation that she had always disdained. Her vessels executed maneuvers that violated optimal engagement parameters, varied their attack rhythms unpredictably, and essentially created the exact kind of chaotic battlefield environment that Cthar Doctrine was designed to eliminate. And it was working. The Black Shard forces, prepared for traditional Cthar precision strikes, found themselves unable to establish effective countermeasures against an enemy that refused to follow its own rulebook. "They're falling back to defensive positions around the facility," Kalen reported, still at his post despite his injury. "Their communication patterns suggest confusion." "Good," Laraka replied. "Maintain pressure. Lieutenant Riley needs every second we can give him." Inside the facility, according to the intermittent updates they received, Riley was moving through the maintenance ducts, avoiding Black Shard patrols, and placing explosive charges at key structural points around their command vessels' docking clamps. "Almost done," his voice reported through heavy static. "They're starting pre-flight procedures, but they're rushing it. Sloppy." Then abruptly the transmission cut off. "Lieutenant Riley, report," Laraka ordered. No response. "Life signs?" she asked her sensor officer. "Unable to isolate human biosignatures through the interference," came the frustrating reply. Laraka made a quick decision. Continue engagement. All vessels maintain current attack patterns. 3 more minutes passed with no word from Riley. The Black Shard command vessel's engines were now visibly powering up, energy readings indicating imminent departure. "Commander," Kalen said quietly, "we're running out of time." She knew what he meant. If the vessel launched with its gravitonium cargo, they might never have another chance to prevent the Black Shard from developing gravitic weapons. The standing order was clear. The cargo could not be allowed to leave, regardless of the cost. "Prepare targeting solution on the main hangar," she ordered, her voice betraying none of the conflict she felt. "All vessels concentrate fire on my mark." "Wait," called her communications officer. "Emergency transmission, audio only." Riley's voice burst through the speakers, breathless and urgent. "Don't fire. Repeat, hold your fire. Charges are set, but I'm cut off from the extraction point. Need 30 more seconds." Laraka hesitated. The command vessel's engines were at near launch capability. In 30 seconds, they might be too late. 15 seconds, Lieutenant, she replied. "That's all I can give you." "I'll take it," came his response. "You might want to back off a bit. This is going to be more enthusiastic than I planned." The 15 seconds stretched into an eternity as Laraka watched the Black Shard command vessel begin to rise from its docking platform. Her targeting officer had a firing solution locked, waiting only for her command. "Time's up," Kalen said softly. Before she could give the order to fire, the entire southern section of the facility erupted in a massive explosion. The blast wave visibly rippled through the structure, shattering reinforced walls and sending debris spinning into space. The command vessel, caught in the middle of its launch sequence, lurched sideways as its gravitational stabilizers failed, then disintegrated as secondary explosions tore through its hull. "Direct hit on their gravitonium storage," her science officer reported, voice tight with controlled amazement. The chain reaction completely destabilized the processed material. "Lieutenant Riley?" Laraka asked, already knowing the answer. Silence on the comm channel. The tactical display showed only spreading debris where the hangar had been. No human life signs detected, her sensor officer confirmed after a moment. The blast pattern suggests he was at the epicenter of the initial explosion. Laraka stood perfectly still, absorbing this information. Around her, the bridge crew awaited orders, their postures reflecting the sudden shift from combat intensity to the hollow aftermath. The Black Shard forces are in disarray, Kalen reported. They're breaking off engagement, attempting to retreat. Let them go, Laraka said quietly. They no longer possess the gravitonium, and we've suffered enough casualties today. She paused, then added, deploy recovery drones to the explosion site. Lieutenant Riley deserves proper honors. The return to the Vindicator was conducted in unusual silence. The victory had been complete, the Black Shard's plan foiled, their leadership destroyed, and their gravitonium cargo eliminated. By any objective Cthar standard, the mission was an unqualified success. Yet Laraka found no satisfaction in it. The recovery drones had found little among the wreckage, just fragments of human equipment and a single, partially melted identification tag bearing the name Riley J. In her private quarters, Laraka composed the formal report for Alliance Command. The words came easily, clinical descriptions of tactical decisions, enemy capabilities, and mission outcomes. But when she reached the section regarding Lieutenant Riley's actions, she found herself pausing, uncertain how to properly convey what had occurred. Standard Cthar military terminology seemed suddenly inadequate. The human officer executed an unorthodox but effective approach, failed to capture the reality of what she had witnessed. Lieutenant Riley demonstrated commendable initiative, was technically accurate, but fundamentally empty. In the end, she wrote simply, Lieutenant Jake Riley of the United Defense Force gave his life to ensure mission success, displaying valor and tactical insight of the highest order. His actions directly resulted in the neutralization of the primary objective and saved the lives of numerous Cthar personnel. The Dominion owes him a debt of honor. When she had finished the report, Laraka sat for a long time, staring at Riley's recovered identification tag. The human had been infuriating, undisciplined, and almost aggressively casual. He had questioned her orders, violated protocols, and generally embodied everything she had been trained to consider inferior about human military approach. And yet he had seen possibilities where she saw only obstacles. He had adapted instantly to conditions that would have required committee review and doctrine revision in Cthar military structure. He had, in the end, accomplished what the precise machinery of Cthar tactical doctrine could not. There was a soft chime at her door. Kalen, his arm now properly treated and immobilized. The memorial service for Lieutenant Riley, he said without preamble. Alliance protocol suggests we should conduct one before returning to base. The human crew members have requested permission. Laraka nodded. Make the arrangements. Full honors. Kalen hesitated, then said, I've been reviewing our engagement data. The Black Shard forces were specifically equipped to counter standard Cthar tactics. Our casualties would have been significantly higher if we had followed doctrine. I'm aware, Laraka replied. The human's method, Kalen began, had merit, she finished for him. Yes, I will be acknowledging that in my report to High Command. After Kalen had left, Laraka made a decision that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. She opened a secure channel to the Dominion's High Command, requesting permission for something no Cthar commander had done in living memory. The memorial service was conducted in the Vindicator's central assembly chamber. Cthar were not generally given to elaborate ceremonies of mourning. Their traditional rituals were austere, focused on acknowledging the departed's contributions rather than emotional expressions of loss. But today's ceremony incorporated elements of human tradition out of respect for Riley. The chamber was filled with Zephyr squadron pilots and a handful of human personnel assigned to the Vindicator. A simple platform had been erected at the center, bearing Riley's recovered identification tag, flight helmet, and a Medal of Valor Laraka had authorized, the first time such an honor had been bestowed upon a non-Cathar. Laraka stepped forward, her ceremonial armor gleaming under the chamber's lights. Her posture perfect as always, but somehow different, less rigid, perhaps more balanced. "We gather today to honor Lieutenant Jake Riley," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "In Cathar tradition, we measure worth through contribution to the collective, through adherence to our ways, through precision and discipline." She paused, looking at the small collection of human personal effects recovered from the explosion. "Lieutenant Riley embodied none of these qualities," she continued, earning a ripple of surprised muttering from the assembled Cathar. "He was undisciplined by our standards, unpredictable. He approached problems with what appeared to be reckless improvisation. He questioned established doctrines. He did not fit our definition of an exemplary warrior." The humans in attendance shifted uncomfortably, some frowning at what seemed to be criticism of their fallen comrade. But Laraka wasn't finished. "And yet," she said, her voice softer now, "when faced with an enemy that had studied our ways, that had learned to counter our precision and discipline, it was precisely these qualities that proved decisive. Lieutenant Riley saw possibilities where our doctrine recognized only obstacles. He adapted where our protocols would have faltered. He created chaos that became opportunity." She picked up Riley's identification tag, holding it where all could see. "I did not understand the human approach to warfare," she admitted. "I saw only disorder where there was actually a different kind of order, one based on adaptation rather than prescription, on intuition informed by training rather than training that eliminated intuition. I dismissed Lieutenant Riley's skills because they did not resemble my own." Laraka looked directly at the assembled humans now. "I was wrong," she said simply, "and my error nearly cost us this mission. Lieutenant Riley's sacrifice prevented that. He gave his life not just for his own people, but for mine as well. There is no greater honor in any culture." After the ceremony, Laraka spent long hours in meditation, a traditional Cathar practice for processing significant life changes. The mission had altered something fundamental in her understanding of effective warfare, of strength, of honor. It was not a comfortable revelation for a commander who had built her identity on the absolute superiority of Cathar military doctrine. Weeks passed. The Vindicator underwent repairs, received replacement crew, and prepared for new assignments. The alliance continued, strengthened rather than weakened by the joint victory over the Black Shard faction. Kalen recovered from his injuries and resumed his duties, though Laraka noticed a subtle change in his demeanor, a greater willingness to consider unconventional approaches, a slightly less rigid adherence to protocol for its own sake. On the morning the Vindicator was scheduled to depart for its next assignment, Laraka summoned her senior officers to the bridge. They arrived to find her already present, standing at the command station in full ceremonial armor. "Our orders are confirmed," she announced. "We are to conduct security operations in the Perseus Arm, where additional Black Shard activity has been detected. We depart in 30 minutes. The officers acknowledged their orders with crisp precision. As they turned to their stations, Kalen remained, his gaze fixed on something unusual. "Commander," he said quietly, "your armor." Laraka met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Sub-Commander." The traditional ceremonial armor of a Cathar commander was sacred, its markings representing bloodline, achievements, and station. Modifications were permitted only under very specific circumstances and required approval from the highest levels of Dominion authority. There, beneath the ancient Cathar glyphs denoting Laraka's house and honors, a new marking was clearly visible on the right breastplate. 5 simple characters in the human alphabet. Riley. "The High Command approved?" Kalen asked, genuine surprise in his voice. "After reviewing my report and the mission data, yes," Laraka replied. "It is an ancient tradition, rarely invoked, the mark of the worthy outsider. It has not been granted in 7 generations." Kalen studied the modification, then nodded slowly. "It suits you, Commander." "It does," she agreed. "It reminds me that strength takes many forms, and that true honor lies in recognizing worth wherever it appears, even in places we least expect it." As the Vindicator's engines powered up and the crew prepared for departure, Laraka took her place at the command station. Her posture was still perfect, her orders still precise, her expectations for her crew still exacting. But there was a subtle difference now, a willingness to consider the unpredictable, to see opportunity in disorder, to recognize that perhaps the most effective approach combined the structure of Cathar doctrine with the adaptability Riley had embodied. She touched the engraved name on her armor briefly, a private gesture of respect, before turning her attention to the mission ahead. Zephyr Squadron, prepare for departure, she ordered. And be advised, we may need to get creative on this one.